Welcome to our today's webinar to the topic Global Teams, Local Rules, Working Without Borders, Compliance Essentials for Managing Global Remote Employees. My name is Friederike Ruch and I will be the host today for you. We have picked that topic because it's something we are seeing in our daily practice as getting more attention, or companies have a bigger topic or looking at that more often than maybe some years ago. And therefore, we thought it might be good to have a webinar to it where we can quickly go through the different aspects. We also just will, on a high level basis, touch those subjects to maybe provide you with the one or the other um, different view or different angle you might have not looked or thought before about it, and maybe that helps you with the whole topic because it's quite complex and there are so many different aspects to look at. We also have lots of slides we need to tackle now in the next 45 minutes. However, I'm pretty sure we will do that quite well. I would like to start with a short sample. Analytic Inc. is a company or firm situated in Lucerne, Switzerland, and has difficulties to find the right people. The employees do not have to work in the office in Lucerne, and they have now found and identified 5 candidates which are living all over the world, and they might think of hiring them. And maybe if you look at that sample, that looks quite familiar as well to you. It's something where even if we take Switzerland is a very great country and lots of people would like to move to, but there's still quite a bit of a reluctance to that people actually really move from one place to the other place. And therefore, the topic of global teams or companies being in a situation where they have employees all over the world is increasing. So the trend is in that regard that you try to get a bit bigger access to an international talent pool, and therefore you think about also maybe hiring the one or the other individual not now in your own country. Um, I think also I would say based on the pandemics, we learned quite quickly it's quite easy to work with also on a remote basis. So remote work has a bit of a different standpoint in firms. You have the digitalization where you basically can work wherever you want. And also maybe one of the trends which has a bit to do with it as well, or has a bit of an issue, is the matrix organization. Companies try to establish more and more, therefore that maybe it has also an impact on it. Now, global teams, if we take that term, then it can mean lots of different things. It can mean you hire the individual in at your firm and they just work wherever they are. Or it can also mean you are here in one country and your employees are maybe in affiliated firms all over the world. Or you not have just your own employees, but maybe also kind of freelancers, contractors you have to work with. Therefore, it's a mixture of everything. And that also then will lead us to a lot of different challenges, and some of the typical ones we try to summarize here. There are legal risks. I mean, if we look at the first sample where we saw that the firm had identified 5 candidates from 5 different countries. So yes, each country has a different legal setup. So we need to look at that as well. And clearly, if you hire someone who is not working in your own firm in the country where you are, then definitely that also has a bit of a risk attached. Cultural differences. Um, there's a typical, one of the typical challenges is also leading at a distance, so you won't see your employee that often. Some of them you may only see once a year, um, which also then leads to issues with trust and how you communicate. So that has a different level of complexity. HR matters. Each country has a different HR understanding. Therefore, that might is a bit a challenge. You will not be able to actually treat all your employees really equally. So you also need to consider and find a way in that regard. And you need to look at global aspects and then also see what kind of matters and aspects you actually have to deal with on a local basis. So there are lots of different challenges. And if we look at one challenge in regard also equal treatment or global versus local, is the salary level. We have tried to look up and define the salary for a business analyst because that is the position our company in the first sample Analytic Inc. Would like to hire. And in Switzerland, they know there is the salary level they have to pay is 120,000. And when they now were looking up in the other countries, what is there the average salary someone as a business analyst would earn, then they see there's a huge difference between those. Now, as a firm, you would now ask yourself, if I hire now the Romanian business analyst, he stays the whole year in Romania. He will not actually come to the office here. And basically, it's also you hire him. You wanted to, or you maybe ask in the first step whether he not wants to move to Switzerland, but maybe his answer was actually no, because I like it here. I have my family here. My wife has a job. The kids go to school and whatever. I don't want to move. I'm good here. Um, if you look from the job perspective, there's maybe no need that he actually comes to Switzerland. Therefore, clearly you can think about whether now you would like to hire him for the 8,000 Swiss francs as annual salary or actually increase it up to the level of 120,000. But also keeping in mind that the cost of living and everything in Romania is much, much lower than it is in Switzerland. Therefore, you maybe will have in the end then, if people find out that in Switzerland the same position you would earn 120, but in Romania maybe you get the same salary, then you will ask yourself, okay, why would I actually be in Switzerland if I can earn the same amount of money but living in a much lower cost of living standard country and have done much, much more out of it, which is also not a kind of a equal treatment. Therefore, that is one of the challenges where there is not one true and good answer which will fit everybody. So you would need to find a solution for your own firm and what the best approach is. And what we just saw is that as equal and transparent you will define it, the better it is. And then you also can argue with it and can actually discuss it with others without any problems and difficulties. Employment law is also something which is quite critical, and it is something which is linked to the local rules, because clearly if we talk about or if we look into labor law, then that is something which is defined by the place someone is working. And therefore, when I would like now to hire that that business analyst in Romania, if I take that sample, then I cannot just come up with my Swiss standard employment contract. I definitely have to look at the legal side in Romania as well. There might be different rules about working hours, maybe vacation, clearly bank holidays. There might be a different way how you can terminate or separate parties in a contract. So there are lots of different aspects to look at, and therefore that might be then the one thing which is definitely not looking equally and which might quickly lead you to think it is quite complicated and complex. Also, where we now will look in a second to about then tax and social security, which is completely different, the insurance coverage itself, and therefore it is something you need to figure out whether how important the recruiting of those people are, and what is in the end the best way going forward. Because one thing is definitely clear: if you have only one person in Romania, then there are lots of different costs associated to it, which you wouldn't have if the individual would have moved to Switzerland. However, on the other side, you would have a couple of other costs if he had been moving to Switzerland. Therefore, I think it's you need in the end to find a good balance to it. Local rules is definitely, I will have to look at the compensation, the local compensation packages, what is there available in the country the individual is. And then comparing it what I can offer from the place where I am, and then to see and find a good, I think in the end, compromise, a mixture of it. Labor law, immigration, there is not, I can't just do a compromise, but I have to figure out whether there are any aspects I definitely need to have considered in the employment contract. And in regard to immigration, clearly that the work permit is in place. Tax and social security is a bigger aspect, and we will look at that in a second. Permanent establishment is clearly a huge thing. Depends a bit on the level of the employee. So depending where he is situated, or better to say in which hierarchy level he is, might be the permanent establishment risk a bit higher than others. There are a couple of things we can look at and minimize the risk, and we will touch base again on that topic when we go to the tax part. Payroll requirements is a bigger thing. It's just something where I need to think about what kind of setup is the best for my firm and what works best, and then to find the best administrative process update setup. Other compliance matters, there is data protection is one of the things, different prevention factors. So there are lots of stuff you would need to look at each country or country by country to make a good setup and a good you have it in a way where you can definitely say it is working and you have considered every aspect to it. We are focusing here now on the individual who is working in the other country. So if we keep in mind the sample about the Romanian employee we just want to hire as a business analyst. So what we definitely would have to do in that regard is to look at his nationality, look at his resident and work permit in Romania and whether he is allowed and being able to work in Romania based on whatever documents and papers he has. So that is definitely the first checkup you need to do. And only if he has the necessary documents or papers, he would be able to actually support the case. Now, also in case he might not have the right documents yet, is there a possibility as a firm outside of the country that you can sponsor or support or help that he gets the necessary documents and papers? If that's the case, then also perfect. There are also a couple of countries where where we have a digital nomad visa available, which might be also something you can look at. So therefore, there are certain options where you can where someone can work in a different country. But in the end, the compliance check you would definitely would have to do. So if we now have figured out that the individual would be able to, from an immigration perspective, being able to work in the country he is situated, then we also need to check on if he has to come for the one or the other meeting or project or whatever to your country. And if we now take here the sample of Switzerland, so we would have to look at, is the Romanian national able to come to Switzerland to work here for a couple of days? And if yes, what kind of work permit do I need to request, or is there no work permit required? Is there a visa to be requested? So I need to check then whether from an immigration perspective that is actually a possibility. And if I come to the conclusion for both of my checks there, the immigration check in the country the employee is residing, as well as in the country where the business is residing, both is fine, then there's no, at least from an immigration perspective, no problem and no point where you have to say no to the hiring of the individual. If we move then on to the next bit, which is then about the tax and social security part, there again, I need to check on if I stay quickly with our sample with the Romanian employee. Is there an issue with having him employed in Romania? And do I, as an employer outside of Romania, need to withhold any kind of taxes or social security? How does that look like? Are there different tax rates available, or is it something the employee just has to take care? So I need to figure out what are my responsibilities as an employer and how do I safeguard and make sure that the employee is kind of compliant in a tax and social security way, as well as I need to see what are the best practice in the country. Um, Above all, the best practice in regard to insurance coverage. And there you can usually quite quickly see there is from the minimal insurance coverage up to the highest insurance coverage, you can find everything. And there you again need to find a kind of a compromise. In some of the countries, you as an outside employer can take out those insurances. Now, looking at the cost side as well, clearly the cost is a bit higher as you would usually have if you have a bigger number of employees based on the risk factor associated to it. But there is usually no problem at all. Sometimes the employee has to take out the insurances, but there's no issue with you as an outside employer have to can pay for everything. One of the bigger topics is as well about the salary continuation in case of a sick leave or accident. This is something you need to clearly look into it, and that also needs then in the end goes into the employment contract, because there are huge differences between the countries, and there you will definitely not find an equal treatment. However, there also sometimes it might be that you can find a kind of a compromise and have maybe an findings a solution which is not just the um, minimal coverage, but something in between. But if we look at Switzerland and the salary continuation in based on sick leave or accident, then clearly we have one of the, I would say, most favorable systems for employees, and the coverage itself is quite fantastic. Now, will we find that in the other countries as well? Maybe not, not like this, but we clearly can always try to target to get something as similar as possible. I already mentioned the matter of permanent establishment risk, and there's just a new working paper on audience about the concept of permanent establishment risk from home office usage of home office from the OECD. And there is the kind of in a very nutshell, they differentiate between usage of more of 50% or less. And basically the major point is whether the working from home is based on private needs, so the individual needs or individual wish, or it is requested by the business. And if we look now or take the sample of the Romanian employee from Analytic Inc., he is a business analyst. Clearly, if we look at his task as well as the hierarchy level, he is not in the management. He's just a business analyst working for the firm. It's his wish to work out of Romania and not out of Switzerland, and therefore I think the P risk might be a quite low risk. Nevertheless, that is something you clearly should always have a look at and make a checkup before you hire the individual. Because if you have once identified the P risk, then it might be hard in the end to get away with if you have already concluded the employment contract with the employee. And also it might be quite helpful to have a kind of a guideline or guidance for the employee. What are the tasks he's allowed to do and what maybe he shouldn't do. Now we were talking now, I was talking primarily about the employees as a remote working employee. Now, if we take here Pavel Merck as a Polish national, he was hired by Analytic Inc. as well. He should now work 3 days a week in Poland, and 2 days he should come to Switzerland. So if we look at his case, and then we need to find out, as we had to do with all the other employees, we need to check on where is he subject to Social Security. If we say he is 2 days working in Switzerland, 3 days a week in Poland, so more than 49.9%, that is the number you will find in the EU agreement. So he is subject to the Polish Social Security, and for the Swiss files and documentation, you would need to request an A1. Now, salary continuation is based on Polish law because the individual Pavel is not subject to Swiss Social Security. Therefore, everything goes according to the Polish law. Taxation. There, because we don't have any kind of cross-border tax rule between Poland and Switzerland, therefore it's just the division about the days he is working in those two countries, and therefore Switzerland has the right to tax on the Swiss days and Poland on the Polish or non-Swiss working days. So quite simple. Now, if we have identified that now for the individual, we as an employer, or if we take the position of Analytic Inc., we need to look at what do we do with the payroll part. And there, as Analytic Inc., I maybe would like to actually pay the individual myself. I don't want to have anybody else paying my employee. Therefore, I would say the setup would be the main payroll is in Switzerland, where the salary payment also will be done, as well as where I can calculate the Swiss taxes, Taxatzurs, as well as then also deduct it accordingly. However, because the individual is also subject to Polish Social Security, as well as to Polish taxes, and there we have then to see whether, as a foreign employer, I need to take care of that and withhold that, or it's rather with filing a tax return in Poland. In case I would, as an employer, need to take care of, I need then someone running for me in Poland a shadow payroll for the calculation of the Social Security and the taxes. So in the end, I will end up in having to have two payrolls, which is clearly not the ideal situation because it always then gets a bit complicated. Now, it's, to be honest, in the beginning, usually it takes a little while until both payroll teams have found the way and the alignment they need. But as soon as they have understood each other, it works quite well. Yes, it has an additional cost attached to it, and yes, it is has a bit more administration attached to it as the normal payroll. So it's not quite standardly to be done, but there's no problem at all, and it can work quite well. Now, looking at all these different legal aspects, there are a couple of other stuff we need to look at. And one thing is to see about global policy and where would we need to actually, if we have issued a dual global policy, have to adapt it to the local needs or local aspects. And if we start and looking at policies, guidelines, then definitely we need to define the core global standards. So to create that as a kind of a backbone, which is then also kind of the non-negotiable rules to it. So we need to find a consistency at least and try to define maybe regions as well, or other kind of ideas or aspects where we say this is what we need and want to do. In the end, we need then as a second step to identify the areas where we require the local adaptation. So if we, for example, take a global HR policy, then we need to look at in a second part, where do we have legal, cultural requirements? They need to be implemented as well. Then as a third step, we need to look at the balance between consistency and flexibility. So if we have that HR policy, what is our global standards? What is maybe, where can we a bit more flexible? Then the fourth point is a clear governance and accountability. So the document can approve local adaptations, and they are then and how they can communicate it to the employees. We need to think about communication and training. Should it be in just one language or in multiple languages? Can we identify kind of local champions? They can bridge the gaps and then still continuously review it. So if you have those remote working employees or employees all over the world, you would have to look at each policy you would like to set up, and you need to go through the steps and look at what should be really the policy about and how much do you really have to adapt it to the local standards. In one of the first slides as well, we talked about compensation and benefits, and that I would say is looking at least on our daily practice is maybe the biggest challenge in it, because trying to treat everybody equally, and if you come with that sense, then it is quite difficult always to find the right way, because also seeing that compensation can be taxed or be subject to social security in a different way, has maybe also different kind of treatments, and therefore if you want to set up something for your global team, then definitely you would also have to look at local market alignment. What we did in one of the first slides, where we looked up what is the local salary. So looking at the salary level, at least, as well as the purchasing power, to see what is then in the end really equal. We, again, here as well, we need to see how consistent we can be to our global standards we have to find, and versus to be also quite flexible to from the local side. So we need to define the must-haves as well as then the may adapt to the local elements. Total rewards approach is something to be considered. So to consider the salary, the benefits, the bonus, as well as any other non-monetary perks, and then to sometimes it's much easier than to communicate also the total compensation packets and the benefits and the value out of it. And you maybe also take the approach that because maybe in one country, if you pay for the accommodation, that could be a tax-free element, but in the other country, it is a taxable item. So choosing kind of also and optimizing it in the best way possible. The performance-based compensation, try to define a matrix and targets which would work quite well, and to ensure also transparency and to avoid the perceived unfairness. Compliance, legal requirements is definitely a key thing, and you would have to work there with external experts and support, because usually you are not then the expert in that market, in that country as well as market, and you wouldn't have the expertise on it because it's a complete different country, complete different rules. Therefore, I usually would then also see to find the support in the country. And then as well to what you would like to, or the result from the good compensation benefit scheme is that you keep your employees. They are happy with whatever they receive. They feel valued, and also maybe to understand the priorities from the employees, and then to also see whether you can adapt the one or the other thing. So it is key to have a global, again here as well, like with the policies, to have a global consistency, but to be still locally competitive, and to also ensure the compliance with the employee engagement. Therefore, it's a huge thing. It's also already a huge thing to set up a good system with just the local team. But if you then have to look at different countries and different rules and regulations, it's getting much more difficult. Talent acquisition, talent retention, I think that is quite is something you definitely have to look at in that context as well. What you achieve with opening your mind and thinking about hiring as well people in other jurisdictions to live to that global teams spirit, you have a greater access to a greater talent pool. Everybody is saying there's a lack of talents, therefore you can broaden your horizon. You have a possibility as well with all those talents you acquire in different countries to have in a different on a different way also a branding across countries, which you might not have in any other way. You will have to look at hiring models, compliance, have a competitive, we just said that competitive compensation and benefits scheme, as well as trying to understand and meet the experience of the candidate in a very good way. Retention is, I think, even more, you need to focus even more, because there, as the employees are coming from a different jurisdiction, their experience and their understanding, as well as their requests regarding career development, leadership, engagement, cultural aspects, and whatever, compensation, work environment is usually really in completely different setup, different views to it, and to catch that and to find a good compromise with everything where people stay, feel valued, developed, treated fairly is not that easy. And for that, you really have to, I think, focus on it and take lots of time and to develop something which is in the end really helpful and will also help to create that bigger community. Now, leading global teams then for the managers is also something which is not quite easy. There is the need of intercultural competence. Not everybody has that. And also with the difficulty that you won't sit in the same room with your team. You always, or most of the time, communicate through the screens or through the internet. Therefore, that makes it sometimes more difficult to actually also grasp on the feelings of the other person and to see what he really needs and wants, and therefore to have a very clear communication is definitely key. The trust and relationship building will work in a bit of a different way, and you need to find a different way to work on it, as well as to see and make sure you won't lose the employee and you keep him engaged and valued, and so that he will go with you on the journey to work with you. Before we come to the things about the success factors in regard to global teams, there's one more legal aspect, the data protection and employee data, which is in each country a bit different set up. There is an EU directive. Each country has clearly also their own directive on it, or audience or legal regulations. Therefore, you would need to look at that also in each of the countries you will then want to hire people. Above all, because you are dealing in the end with information data from the employees, and therefore you would have to have a very good understanding on the how to collect documents, where you can store them, how much do you need to tell the employee where the data is stored, um, has the employee any kind of say where you store it, to whom you will provide it? Would you have to inform the employee each time you provide the data to someone else that he is informed beforehand and maybe even has to improve it? What is in what if there is a data breach? What is the response procedure you need to have in place? Or um, how can you on a global scale then in the end keep track on also different rules, regulations, changes there are? That is not that easy. But there again, there is that you try to find a kind of a global standard, which you then outline for all the countries and see then where you have, in addition to have the one or the other thing to adapt on a local basis. If we went now, we went now through all the different aspects, and I think you have seen there are lots of different angles to it, and I think there are, and we try to put our, at least from our point of view, the success factors on one slide. To kind of sum it up in that regard, I think it's very important to have a clear global strategy with being still locally flexible. So to define my standards, keep my priorities, but keeping in mind I can't have everybody happy with the same standards, and I clearly need to have a local flexibility. to have a strong legal and compliance awareness. And I think that is something where definitely there is, you need to keep in mind there are will always be changes. So you need to have a kind of a good understanding of it and trying to have a proactive managing then of compliance risks. Consistent but locally competitive HR practices. So to ensure from your point of view that you have actually the expertise in hired someone or have the expertise in the country you hire these people, and then to try to see that everybody has the same understanding that even there is unequal treatment, meaning maybe the salary is in one country um, just looking at the number lower than the others, but you see it as because maybe in the other country is the cost of living much lower. It's still a competitive salary for the firm, and therefore that is something locally so that a third party would clearly understand it. You need to have a very good, effective cross-cultural leadership. So that is something maybe you also need to invest a bit in training in that regard to have the those skills and the idea and the concept, knowing the concepts mostly is the key to understand the employees working on a project on your projects in the different countries. A strong governance and defined responsibilities, I think that is always quite important so that you can make sure that everybody knows exactly what he needs to do. Communication and collaboration infrastructure, which should work very good, as well as then also the focus on the talent and the employee experience. And if you looked at those 7 success factors and try to find the best way for you, which works the best for you, then definitely your global team would be a hit and you would work very well with it. We have now, because that was now quite theoretical the whole time, we now try to find 3 samples before we then also close to kind of give a bit of an practical aspect on it. If we take the sample of an home office, someone just working at a home office like like Pavel, which we discussed earlier. Here we have Kurt Engler, who lives in Austria, is employed by Analytic Inc. in Switzerland. He works 3 days a week in the office in Switzerland and 2 days from home in Austria. So what kind of aspects do we have to look at from a legal perspective? So we would issue him a Swiss employment contract. He would be subject to Swiss labor law. At least we would issue the employment contract based on Swiss labor law. But because if he's working 2 days a week in Austria, we clearly would have to also look at the mandatory regulations and rules in Austria. So the employment contract needs in the end to have both combined. From an immigration perspective, he is an Austrian national. Therefore, we don't need to do anything in Austria. However, for working in Switzerland, we need to request a cross-border permit, for example, so that he can work those 3 days per week in Switzerland. Social Security wise, he will be subject to Swiss Social Security contributions because he is only working 40% from home. If we say he's not going on business trips on a regular basis or anything else, then based on the teleworking rules, we can have him keeping in the Swiss system, be exempted from the Austrian system. We just would need to get the A1 for him, so he has that for Austria. And taxation the taxation in Switzerland is for the Swiss days, and in Austria he would have to pay for the non-Swiss days. Because of the taxation, or there is no withholding requirements for the Swiss firm in Austria, we can also only have a payroll here in Switzerland. We don't need one in Austria, and therefore it's quite simply set up. I mean, there are the other aspects to look at as well. However, from a legal perspective, you would have here a very good sample for someone working in the home office. Permanent remote work, if we take now our sample in Luis Suarez, who is Brazilian national. He is in Brazil, the one we also indicated in the beginning. He will work out of Brazil the most of the time, however, needs to come as well for 10 days a year to Switzerland. From an employment perspective, employment contract clearly based on Brazilian law because it's only 10 days here in Switzerland, so it doesn't make any sense to put it on Swiss employment law. Compensation, we need to think about what we want to do, whether we would keep him in the Brazilian kind of compensation level, or we actually will put it on a higher basis like the Swiss one, or kind of a compromise. Immigration, he is Brazilian national, therefore he's allowed and able to work in Brazil without any problems. For Switzerland, we would need to have a work permit for him, and we need to then find one where he would be able to work on. The Swiss authorities are a bit hesitant for someone being locally employed for just and get a permit for 10 days, but there are cantons where there is no problem at all to get that. Social Security, he will be definitely subject to Brazilian Social Security for working in Switzerland those 10 days. We do have a treaty between Brazil and Switzerland, therefore we can request the certificate of coverage in Brazil and have that in place in Switzerland in the files. Taxation, he is working most of the time out of Brazil, therefore he is subject to Brazilian income tax. However, for the Swiss working days, even it's just for meetings, those will be subject to Swiss taxation there. Therefore, on the payroll, you would need to declare and deduct the Swiss tax at source for those 10 days. Payroll-wise, if we take the setup that Switzerland would like to pay out the salary, so the main payroll will be in Switzerland, and in Brazil we would just have the shadow payroll for getting the Brazilian income tax deducted as well as the social security in Brazil. And with that, we do have a very good setup for that as well. As the last sample, we would like to quickly go through with you a sample for a workation. So we have Sina Maya. She's also an employee of Analytic Inc. She is Turkish national, and she would like to stay now for 3 months in Turkey as her grandmother is recovering at home and would need some help from her. As she already used up most of her holiday, she offers now to work every day, but out of Turkey. Her residence is in Lucerne. She has a B permit, so she is residing in Switzerland, completely integrated here already for 4 years, and now just would like to work for those 3 months in Turkey. What we would have to look at in to see whether we kind of could approve it, to say, yes, you can work. If from a job perspective there's no problem, then kind of why not? Now, we have to look at the same different legal aspects we did for the other two. So immigration wise, no problem. Sina is Turkish national, so she can definitely work out of Turkey. Labor law, are there any kind of mandatory requirements we have to look at for 3 months? You definitely have to look at those to see at least what is with working hours, what is with national holidays, stuff like this. Taxation, she is less than 183 days working in Turkey. Now we definitely also have to look at where has she spent the other days in from her holiday. So seeing that the 183 days are just not those 3 months she's working there, but to look at the whole calendar year and making sure she's not overstaying there. Social Security, we do have a treaty with Turkey, therefore she can be exempt from Turkish Social Security, so no problem at all. We just would advise her to get an international health insurance coverage, so in case something is coming up in Turkey, she can go to a doctor without any problems, or even if she also needs to go to the hospital, there is no problem at all. If you now have listened to all of that, and as we went through all these different aspects, there is clearly the need to have a very good framework with the key understanding to think global and act local. And I think you have heard that from me throughout the last minutes as well, that this is kind of key with whatever you do, that you view everything with those two measurements. You would have to look at the strategy alignment so that business objectives and growth markets work quite well with the workforce strategy. Create and define an employment model which works well for you. Use whatever kind of possibilities there are and see what the legal requirements are. Looking at legal and compliance to always make sure you are, you know the risks, and then can make up your mind what you want to do with it. From an HR implementation, to try to define it also in a way that you, even if you try always to have an equal treatment, but to see that global part as a chance as well to get to the talents you need, and to try to find a kind of a compromising way to get everything, everybody on board, and that at least the perception is everything is equal. Leadership culture that needs something, there are new skills you need, a new ways that you also work with, and to be successful, that is definitely something you should keep an eye on. And then also the monitoring, the governance is something you have to look at and define the roles and responsibilities, approval processes, and stuff like this. So the monitoring, the risk management is also quite important to make sure you are in line with that. Before we close, we have defined the 5, for us at least, 5 key takeaways. It's the balance of global standards with local compliance. And our tip to that is to create a global framework, plus also seeing and keeping local exceptions. Second one would be to understand local legal and tax implications. And there, our tip is definitely always consult local HR legal experts before hiring or also sending employees or staff abroad. Third one would be align HR practices globally, but respect local differences. Our tip is to maintain a central HR policy manual, but allow country-specific adjustments. And I think we have talked about that before. To lead with cultural awareness, so provide intercultural training, set clear norms for the employment setup as well. And the fifth key takeaway should be use tools and governance to reduce risk. So implement the global HR and local compliance model with a clear reporting lines and a clear risk management tools attached to it. We're coming here to the end of our today's webinar. I hope you enjoyed it and could take away the one or the other thing. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to see you soon at one of our other events. Thank you.